Welcome to Friday Night Firelight, presented by Mortal Up. I'm Brian Brawdy, your host, broadcasting with Telestream's Wirecast, and sponsored by Nutrient Survival at nutrientsurvival.com, and of course, Firebugs at Firebugs, that's BUGGZ.com. Good evening, and if no one's said to you already, happy Cinco de Mayo. Get my little shot of cultural appropriation out right there, right? Just like if I had said happy St. Patrick's Day, right? Who could fault me? Who could fault me? But I hope you're having a great Friday night nonetheless. Like, look, way back when I decided to do this idea of Friday Night Firelights, you may very well remember that we were going to do it, and we've done it below zero and wind and rain, and tonight, not a cloud in the sky, couple of mosquitoes afoot, but it's really beautiful out here. Temperatures in the low 60s, maybe high 50s. But what I am aware of now is the kids out running around, the people throwing barbecues and bouncing around on trampolines, and the dogs barking and everything else. I never said I was the sharpest knife in the drawer, but when it comes to thinking about, Friday Night Firelights, how peaceful is that going to be? Apparently not at all. All right, before we get into it, I got so much cool stuff that I want to speak about this evening, talk with you with, get your sense. Thank you all for joining me. Let me thank quickly our sponsors. Of course, we wouldn't be coming to you live if it weren't for Telestream's Wirecast. I super appreciate it. Sean, big shout out to you. Of course, our friends at Nutrient Survival. You know, I was sitting around the other day writing, and I was talking about sustenance, right? Like philosophical sustenance, psychological sustenance, and the food that we eat, the sustenance. And then I thought, nutritional sustenance. That's a really big deal because, I guess you could just stockpile if you wanted to, right? You could stockpile ramen noodles. Your family will get over the taste of MSG. And let me ask you, since everyone's screaming about science, have they ever really proven any long-term adverse effects to MSG? Really? Have they? I don't know. But I'm telling you, I'm not willing to take any chances, which is why I use Nutrient Survival. As they say all the time, feed your freedom. Never see, there go, cue the dogs barking from the neighbors bouncing around the trampoline. Never surrender, never settle. And as you know, I say, never stress, because I don't have to worry about it. Well, we're going to get to stress here a little bit earlier or a little bit later in the show, but never stress, of course, Nutrient Survival. And I couldn't have done any of this if it weren't for Firebugs and all the cool things that go when you look at their propane fire pits, their wood-burning fire pits, as I like to call it, Firebugs on the fly, which we'll get to here. You know, I was having a conversation with those folks just the other day and say, man, the weather is just really caused me to hunker down. I never realized it would be this wet and this cold and this raining. I mean, these people and their global warming, I got to tell you, when the budget permits, I grab 2 cans of aerosol anything and spray it right at the sun. I just don't get it, but it's been cold. The other day it was 36 degrees here overnight. I think we had 2 or 3 days this week at 36 degrees. But thankfully tonight, according to my combat meteorologist, Chris Tomer, if you're listening, thank you again, not a cloud in the sky. All right, so here's what I wanted to get to. All week long, last week, if you remember part 1, this is part 2 where I said I would wish you happy Cinco de Mayo, once again. And we talked about the oracle at Delphi, right, to the god Apollo. And we talked about Pythia. And this was something where you'd come and you'd want your fortune read, or, you know, you just want to speak to one of the sayers and have her tell you what the fates were thinking, right? And above that oracle at Delphi is know thyself. Well, what I wanted to talk about a little bit today was technically knowing yourself. Now, everyone has a concept. Everyone has an idea. This is what I do for a living. This is my job. This is what I do on the weekends. This is the car I drive. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about deep down where the mind meets your body and your body meets your mind. Who is it? What is it specifically that we're talking about? And I was excited tonight to be kicking around the nuts and bolts of bravery, if you will. I mean, let's get down to the brass tacks of who you and I really are, especially with all the craziness going on in the world now. We have to have a fallback plan. Our plan B has to be you and me. It just has to be. We've got to be able to look in the mirror and go, I can handle no matter what fate throws at me. I'll put my family, I'll put my friends, I'll put my neighbors behind my back, and I'll say, I can handle this. Don't worry about it. Or, as I mentioned last week, when you can't call 911, when you can't dial 911, when you can't call on anyone else, can you call on yourself? But what is this self we keep talking about? You hear about it all the time in the news. What is this self? And that's what I'd like to talk about today, the nuts and bolts, I say, of bravery, or the neurochemistry of courage. Now, I know it's popular to believe that survival and preparedness doesn't have to be for anything extreme. It can be, do you take an umbrella when you go out? You're a prepper. Do you put your seatbelt on in a car when you drive? You go, well, Brad, that's the law. Okay, well, bad example. Do you ever you go to one of these stores where you buy things in bulk, and you buy one of these things, and do you ever buy like a 2-pack of aspirin or Tylenol or the like, right? In case one day you get a headache. You ever do that? You ever buy that? Well, then you're a prepper. Do you set an alarm so that you don't sleep past whatever? I'm up every morning at 4:30 because of the birds. Even before the birds, just probably the voices in my head. But by 4:30, my mind's ready to kick me out and get me started. But do you ever set an alarm so that you don't miss your drive into a big meeting or an important call, or maybe you're being interviewed on the podcast? Do you ever set your alarm? You're a prepper. So when I talk about preparedness in emergency situations, what it boils down to really is your opinion of yourself. And I mean that to say that emergency preparedness and survival comes down to you looking at yourself based, right? It's like a ratio. You put yourself up against everything going around you in that particular moment at all the time, right? As I like to say all the time, can you fly by the seat of your pants when out of the blue happens to you? When you're knee deep, and it'll never happen to me. Is your sense of self such that you can handle whatever Mother Nature throws at you? Maybe it's a man-made catastrophe. Whatever befalls you, do you have the confidence to go, yeah, I'll take a deep breath and I'll make it happen? Because the neurochemistry of courage comes down to that question. How good do you think you are? How ready do you think you are? As you stare into the flames tonight, what part of your family tree, what part of your ancestry has prepared you to be able to face whatever challenge comes our way? And the neurochemistry of the human brain is that if, we say it all the time in the outdoors, I've been saying it for 30 years now maybe, if you panic, you perish. So when I say that all preparedness and all survival comes down to the you that you see when you look in the mirror, do you think you can handle it? Now, there's a checklist. Do I have nutrient survival food? Do I have the ability to keep my family warm? Let's say it's a firebug's fire pit. Do I have the ability to keep my family warm? Do I have a list of medical supplies? There are some things that can fall into our crash kit, let's say. But how about a cognitive crash kit? In addition to your food, your warmth, your shelter, your medical supplies, do you have the mental, the psychological wherewithal to go, yeah, I can handle anything at all? Now, I don't want to get terribly personal about it because you can watch my episode of Doomsday Preppers from way back when, if you like. We get into it in a good bit of detail because everyone wants to paint you as a prepper. They want to paint you as nuts. They want to paint you as crazy. They want to be able to call 911. I'll call the government. I'll call a paramedic. I'll call this or that. Right? So we went over that at length. I don't want to do that now. But what I do want to remind you of is, do you feel prepared to face the absolute worst? And I think what happens, there goes a mosquito. I think what happens is we tend to believe that life is supposed to be smooth sailing. We tend to believe that life is supposed to be easy. Pretend to believe that we can be a couch potato and life is just going to let us up off the mat, off the couch, as it were. But nothing could be farther from the truth. You and I are sold that false bill of goods when we're little, right? Because they don't want you to think that life is a struggle. But look at any other corner of the planet and life is a struggle. So a little bit of truth of advertising is life is a struggle, but you're a struggler. You have the ability, you were born with the ability to out-brutal the brutal come what may. So all we're saying in terms of survival and emergency preparedness is, do you have a good enough opinion of yourself so that you go, look here, how bad it gets, I can rise to the occasion. Because when you say to yourself, I can rise to the occasion, I'm pretty good at it, I'll be able to handle whatever it is. Would I like it to be smooth sailing? Sure, but am I absolutely certain that there are rough waters ahead for all of us in the future? Some way, shape, or form, are there rough waters? Absolutely, I'm a realist. Now, I know most people confuse realist with racist in this day and age, but just send all the hate mail to me, right? I'm a realist. Right? The military says you got to embrace the suck. You got to out-brutal the brutal, as I like to say. So there very well could be some times in the future that it's just not smooth sailing. The seatbelt light comes on, the oxygen bags drop, and there's turbulence. But you and I are built for that turbulence. That's what's in our family tree for thousands and thousands and thousands, depending upon your frame of reference. For as long as human beings have been around, they've come to the end of the day, stared into the flames. They didn't lie to themselves. They go, oh, that was pretty, that was pretty easy today. No, they didn't. They licked their wounds. They did what they could to recover from the day, fully confident in their ability to face tomorrow, face tonight, and then wake up and face tomorrow no matter what. And why do I keep calling it the neurochemistry of courage? Because we're not talking about bravado. We're not talking about, oh, I'm really good. What we're talking about is that if you can in advance begin to believe in yourself to handle uncomfortable feelings, if you can believe in yourself to handle no matter what happens, your brain goes, yeah, she's got this covered. Your mind goes, nah, he's up for this. He's up for this challenge. And then all of the chemicals that would normally course into your body for flight or flight, those chemicals don't kick in. And what do they tell us now? You don't have the stress. You don't have the cortisol. You have an increased span of life if you're not habitually worried about the stresses in life. What do they also tell us about stress? That the number one thing to remember about stress is that it's like, have you ever heard the study where they took the rats and they gave them a little bit of poison, and then a couple days gave them a little more poison, a couple days later a little more poison, a week later they gave them another poison, like 2 weeks later they gave them poison, didn't affect them at all because they had built up an immunity to that very poison. Well, you and I can build up that immunity to stress when we take an honest assessment, right? Let's do a knowledge set, an honest assessment of what you can accomplish should there be an emergency situation. And when you do that, your mind goes, you know what? He doesn't. She's ready for this. No need to give her the fight or flight chemicals. Fight, flight, or freeze, we now know, right? No need to give those fight or flight chemicals because your mind's like, what's in it? Piece of cake. I've got this covered. And what happens is when the emergency situation, heaven forbid, presents itself, then your mind goes, I got to tell you, I'm not that concerned. I'm not all that worried about it. We've talked before about the BEST acronym. We won't go into it now. I'll put a link in the show description. Is the last time we spoke about the BEST acronym at length. But you and I don't need the tunnel vision. We don't need the neurochemicals. When you talk about the chemistry of courage, the nuts and bolts of bravery, it's all chemicals. It's nothing but chemicals, nothing but neurotransmitters. And when you have an honest assessment, so let's say you find yourself and you go, I could be a little bit better at emergency medicine. Great. In this day and age, everything's on the internet. Oh, I could get a little more nutrient survival food. Groovy. Oh, I could make sure I have enough wood. I have enough propane. I have what I need for my firebug's fire pit. Right? We can make a checklist. We can go, okay, great. Yeah, maybe I will pick up some aspirin. Maybe I'll freshen up on the Heimlich maneuver. Maybe I'll make sure that everyone in my family, right? Because what happens if you get knocked out? Everyone in my family, would they know how to do CPR? Does your family know where the fire extinguishers are? Let's say, heaven forbid, you lose power, and yet there's still a fire. Does everyone in your family know what closets hold the fire extinguishers? Just something that you can do. So now you've done this checklist in advance. You know, just right, like before you go on a trip, you check that spare tire, make sure there's air in it. You've done all the advance work, right? You've done all the preliminary work. You get to the point where you go, nah, I got it covered, I got it covered, I got it covered, I got it covered, I got it covered. Then your mind sits back and goes, yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's anything to get all that worked up about. Then the neurochemicals, they're busy just loving life. They're not taunting you. They're not making you a nervous Nelly, whatever it is. Sorry if your name's Nelly. Again, send the emails. I think it's info@mortalaproductions.com. Right? But that way, you're able to use your chemicals. Ooh, that was a big moth. You're able to use your chemicals as opposed to your chemicals using you. Which brings me full circle to knowing what it takes to out-brutal the brutal. Number one, remember, your mind works for you. You don't work for your mind. In that emergency situation, you draw in a deep breath and you go, I got this covered. Well, what if you do? Then your brain goes, no, I think he's right. I think she is. I think she's nailed it. She's got her checklist. She knows what's going to happen. And then you can use all that energy to move forward and to thrive, not just survive. So when we talk about the mind and body and mind, I mentioned in a post, I think earlier today, that I studied Latin and Greek very early on in my life from my grandfather. And one of the very first sayings that I learned, and one of his favorite sayings that we would take. I even remember, well, we'll talk about that another time, but he had a friend of his from Greece that spoke Greek that owned a restaurant, and we would go there so that I could sit there and I would trade doing, I don't know what little kids do, dishes, clean up, bust the tables, whatever it was, and he would help me in terms of some of the translations. But one of them was from the Gospel of Luke. It said, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man, right? And Plato says, look, it's not all mind, you're nothing. It's not all body, you're a tyrant. It's the blending of mind and body. As above, so below. So when you make your checklist, physically and mentally, right? Psychologically, soul and sinew, have you put the things on your list? Have you checked them off so that you can confidently say, I'm the guy, I'm the girl that's going to get through this? And when you do that, what's going to befall you? Let's be honest. What's really going to happen? And I look, only because it just came to mind. And if you've been with me any time at all, you know, as soon as it comes to my mind, I splurt it out. I can remember being in the hospital. I can, my second brain surgery, I can remember thinking this was it for me. It's all over. Was I prepared? Was I prepared for my final moments? I had said goodbye to my family. Sure, I'd missed them. I had made amends with the people that I wanted to make amends with before I even went in. So even at that extreme, are you prepared? There was a great Limitless with the Thor guy, Chris Helmsworth, I think it is, Limitless. And they acted as if he was getting ready to die. No matter what the circumstance, if you're prepared to square your shoulders, if you're prepared to draw your line in the sand and go, I've studied it all, I know what I'm going to do no matter what happens. You've drawn your line in the sand. What does it matter? Lead with your chin. There's nothing going to befall you that you can't handle. You and I were put here for a reason. That reason, first and foremost, is to survive. Everything else comes after that. Everything else we'll achieve comes after we survive. But how do we survive? We do it first and foremost by having an honest assessment of who we are as a survivor, who we are as a thriver, who we are as a prepper. Make your checklist. Have your food, have your fire, have your first aid, have your philosophy overall of being able to handle whatever waves are thrown at you. And then you'll be surprised how much stress there really isn't. You'll be surprised what a great gig it seems to all the rest of us who have done the work, it's just a great gig. People say all the time, oh, life is this, life is that. And as I probably mentioned last week in part 1 of this, when it comes to know yourself, I'm not interested in redemption. I'm here right now, tonight, as I sit here, I'm here to repay a debt. I'm thrilled to have been given the opportunity, religion or science, however you want to look at it. I'm thrilled to be here, having been granted a run at life. What are you going to throw at me until it's time to go home? What are you going to throw at you until your very last moments? All right, I'll go ahead and get out of here. We want to keep these for 20 minutes. Oh, and we've incorporated, let me say hi to Wayne real quick. He's taken a couple of weeks off. He's I probably shouldn't say that he's halfway around the world, because then I just shouldn't. But so forget I said that, right? This might be taped anyways. Who knows if I actually got the show to go out. Forget I said he's halfway around the world. But he's taken a couple weeks off. So Wayne, thank you very much for everything. He's queued up a little bit of something, because I realize that at times when I say, oh, come sit by the fire, see what the flames have to say to you. You don't want my mug in the flames. You want to look in the flames and see what they're saying to you. So let's do this. Before I go, have an absolutely fantastic weekend. I hope it's finally warm wherever you are. And until we speak again next, thank you for everything. And don't forget, it's in your blood to mortal up. It's who you are. So what do you say we run the table? Mortal up, the antidote for what ails you. All right, here we go. What will the flames say to you? Good night, everybody.